afternoon. You guys all set? We're back in the Chippewa Valley to talk today again about our efforts to move the state forward. Right off the bat, I should say today the Department of Workforce Development announced that we had new job numbers in, and throughout the first month of the year we were able to see the unemployment rate drop to 7.4%, some 10,000 jobs created in the private sector. That's a good sign. And we'd like to build on that and continue to move the state forward and getting us back to work. And part of that means having a budget that is stable and is balanced. Just the other day, Moody's, one of the national bond rating agencies, pointed out that the budget we presented last Tuesday is credit positive, and it's one of the strong statements from yet another independent sources that will be good for the state of Wisconsin. Obviously, to make that budget work in the future, to do what other states are not doing right now, which is all across the state we have, or all across the country, I should say, we have governors in states where they're both Republican and Democrat governors alike. There are in nearly every state in this country governors who are cutting billions of dollars from aid to state and local governments. The difference is in those other states, in order to do that, what they're doing is passing that burden on, either in the form of massive potential layoffs of teachers and other local government workers and the reduction of services, or alternatively in other states they're passing it on in the form of massive property tax increases, and in far too many states it's some of both. What we're proposing here in Wisconsin is something different, something unique. We're trying to be progressive and move the state forward, and offering the third option that they're not providing in other states, and that's the ability to give local governments the tools they need to balance the budget without massive property tax increases and without massive layoffs. The other thing that's important to know that really hasn't been covered up until this point is not only does this budget repair bill address the budget crisis that we're facing not only now but over the next 2 years, it equally, if not of greater importance, allows local and state governments to reform government, period. For us, we've seen example after example of where collective bargaining not only is a fiscal matter, but it stands in the way as a barrier for governments trying to do things better to better serve the people. A great example of that is we had a year ago about at this time, we had a situation where a young woman, Megan Sampson, was given the award as the outstanding new teacher here in Wisconsin. A week later, in her school district, she got a layoff notice. The reason for that was because under her collective bargaining agreement, they determined that hiring and firing has to be done based on seniority via the union contract and not based on merit or performance. That's wrong. Schools and local governments across the state should be able to make decisions about putting the best and the brightest in the classroom and the best and the brightest in the jobs that they have here at the local level as well as at the state level. And that's really what this bill does. It gives governments at the state and local level the tools to do that. We've got example after example after example. The fact that collective bargaining right now gives some workers the right to have $6,000 of additional pay just for carrying a pager. The idea that you've got a bus driver in the city of Madison who makes more than $150,000 a job. Even the fact that because of collective bargaining over in Wausau, a union filed a grievance because a elderly gentleman, a senior citizen, wanted to volunteer to serve as a crossing guard, and the union filed a grievance because of collective bargaining said that that individual couldn't do that, that they had to put someone else there even though he wanted to volunteer his time. Time after time we've seen that collective bargaining is not only a fiscal issue, it makes it more difficult to balance the budget at the state and the local level. It's also a barrier in many cases to true reform to making government work better for the people that we were elected to serve. We're here today to talk about our efforts to push that forward, to get the message out that this is about government reform. Just as Governor Thompson talked in the 90s about welfare reform, we're trying to reform government to make it more responsive to people. At the same time, we balance our budget without massive layoffs and without massive property tax increases. The last thing I'll just say is in terms of the process that we've done, because we've been here in the Chippewa Valley many times in the past couple of weeks. We'll keep coming back over and over again as we, in the future, hopefully more to talk about things that show that this state is working again and how we're helping put people to work here in the Chippewa Valley. But we've seen now very clearly in the past couple of weeks The barrier to progress on this is not coming from my office, and it's not coming from the majority of the Assembly and the Senate. The barrier to progress is coming squarely from State Senator Mark Miller. A week and a half ago, last Monday, Senator Scott Fitzgerald traveled to Kenosha to meet with some of the reasonable senators to try and find a pathway home for them. A week ago today, on Wednesday, I sent my own staff to go meet in Kenosha with those reasonable senators. They, in order to hopefully accomplish some sort of a movement forward, invited Senator Miller to come along with them at the Kenosha McDonald's, where they even had a good gathering, had a little bit of hot cocoa. And we had such a good gathering at that point, a good meeting amongst those senators, that my staff on the way home called me at about midnight to tell me what had been accomplished and how they thought we had the pathway home for those senators. The next day came in on Thursday. Senator Miller backed away from movement on that. We reached out again on Friday. We reached out again to set up a meeting on Saturday, and on Sunday, my staff again met with several of those reasonable state senators. Unfortunately, time and time again, Senator Miller stood in the way of progress. He misled the Republicans. He misled, I believe, in many ways, his own caucus. And finally, last Sunday and Monday, we saw that he's misleading the public. Sunday night, he told the Wall Street Journal that the Senate Democrats were ready to come back home. Monday morning, he changed his position again and suddenly said they weren't coming back home and demanded a meeting much like the one he was unaware of that happened with several of his colleagues the day before. Senator Miller has to decide when he's going to be straight with the people of the state, and ultimately when is going to be the pathway to come home. Because as I've said repeatedly, they've succeeded in doing what they set out to do, to slow down the debate, to inform the public. But at some point, you got to come back home and vote, and that's what we're asking for here today.
Governor, what do you think about the joint proposal that's been put forward by the Assembly and Senate Democrats? And it seems to be going off some of the things that we mentioned in the meeting.
Well, again, I'll have to take a look at it. Apparently, they put it out to the press before they put it out to us. This is typical of the process. We were serious about it. It's why we released pages and pages of emails yesterday on an open records request, because we have been sincerely meeting with some of these reasonable Senate Democrats, not having negotiations in public. Again, this is another prime example where they're not really interested in trying to get progress, or they would actually be proposing those to us before they put them out in the press.
It does include collective bargaining, taking collective bargaining rights away. So is it something you'd consider?
It proposes what?
It would, in that proposal, it would not take away collective bargaining rights.
Well, let me be clear. There are no collective bargaining rights. If there were, the federal government would not be in a position where they have no collective bargaining for wages and benefits. There are only provisions that are granted in terms of collective bargaining through the state statutes. The fundamental rights that protect individuals come from the Constitution at both the state and federal level, and neither of those mention collective bargaining. The guarantees in terms of workplace protection, again, come not from collective bargaining, but instead from the civil service protections in the state. And in terms of what we're willing to look at, is we laid it out very clearly over the past several weeks that we were willing to negotiate to find a pathway home. We threw out a series of ideas, but what I have said here in Eau Claire and across the state of Wisconsin is I'm not going to sell out local governments who need to have all the tools possible to balance their budgets now and in the future and to make government work better. So far, the response we've got from Senator Miller is to close down those debates. The ideas they've thrown on the table are things that still stand in the way of local governments being able to balance their budget and operate government more effectively. Now, if they're willing to change on that and willing to give and take on that, we're willing to talk to them. But thus far, any meaningful debates have been stopped by Senator Miller.
Governor, you had a lengthy meeting with senators, Republican senators. What did you decide? What did you talk about?
Well, they're still having ongoing the meeting. I went and talked to them, and then I went over to Ag Day, as I promised agriculture leaders from across the state of Wisconsin.
Was there a key topic that you were talking about?
We were talking about this bill and talking about what are options. That's been a source of frustration not only for the Senate Republicans, but really as we've traveled around the state, when I've been here and other places, the frustration is that people just want to move on. Overwhelmingly, we've heard from people who support our position on asking public workers like myself to pay more for the pension and for the health care contributions. They want to find a way to do that. but most people I talk to are frustrated that more progress hasn't happened. And so we talked to the Senate Republican caucus about what other alternatives, what other options. They're still discussing some of the options we were talking about earlier. And my hope is later today, early tomorrow, we can explore whether or not there might be some alternatives to what we faced over the past 3 weeks.
What might that be? What's new?
Well, again, we're still looking at what other legal options there are in order to move these measures forward, but until we can get confirmation not only from them, but from the sources that provide nonpartisan, objective information for the legislature, we'll announce it obviously when they get confirmation. For us, we're looking at all the different options that might be out there. Again, great frustration we can't move this forward, great frustration that even though there was an election last November, that 14 individuals seem to be set fit about, in many ways, not only not coming back now, but I think arguably there's a core group down there that is willing to stay up for the next 2 years, and I think for the people of the state, that's unacceptable.
Governor, the Eau Claire District Attorney is pretty upset. He says he's gotten notice that there are potentially going to be some layoffs, part of the 1,500. He said it gives them a deadline. It doesn't give them a number. It doesn't tell them basically who or how this is going to go down. He says it's inhumane, it's irresponsible, and he's blaming you.
Well, he should blame Senator Kathleen Vinehall, because if she'd just come back and do her job, he wouldn't even have to be considering these layoffs. The bottom line is the only reason we are here today talking about any sort of layoffs is because those 14 state senators have refused to do the job and come back. We have pushed off layoffs as far as we can. We have not been eager about that. In fact, as I mentioned time and time again, one of the most difficult tasks I've ever had as a local county official was to consider layoffs, and we want to avoid that. We pushed it all the way back to last Friday, which was the last possible time we could do to have them be effective the first week of April. Our hope is in the next day or two we'll find an alternative, either because one or a handful of those senators will come back, or because there's some other legal mechanism for us to make these changes without having all or at least 20 state senators there. And from that standpoint, if we can find that path, find a path for at least one of them to come back, we can avoid all that. We can avoid the layoffs, not only that you're talking about, but any number of the 1,500 plus that we'd have to lay off in the future. But anyone who's concerned about that should be picking up the phone and calling Senator Kathleen Vinehall and any of the other 14 state senators who are missing from their job.
Well, you said you're punishing them because you're trying to get something from somebody else.
We're not punishing them at all. We said almost 4 weeks ago that this is not some last-minute negotiations deal. Nearly 4 weeks ago this week, I announced the budget repair bill and said this budget repair bill will provide $30 million worth of savings effective the first week of April for pension and health care contributions. I said then, it wasn't a threat, it was just a statement of fact, that if we failed to do that, the equivalent amount of savings would be equal to 1,500 layoffs of state workers, and even more in the future if we don't get this. We are